The radar screen shouldn't have been showing anything. Kaela stared at the display, her violet eyes widening as the contact signatures multiplied across the monitor. 1 became 10, 10 became 50. 50 became hundreds. The deep space sensor array was painting targets in a formation so vast it stretched beyond the edge of her scanning range. "Supervisor Drenth," she called out, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm getting anomalous readings on the primary array." The older Zephari male lumbered over to her station, his gray scales catching the dim lighting of the outpost's command center. He glanced at her screen with the kind of bored irritation that came from 20 years of monitoring empty space. "Equipment malfunction," he grunted. "Run a diagnostic. I already did. 3 times. The system checks out perfectly." Kaela's fingers danced across the haptic interface, pulling up spectral analysis data. "These are solid contacts, sir. Mass signatures consistent with capital ship configurations. Hundreds of them." Drent leaned closer, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion. "That's impossible. No civilization fields that many warships in a single fleet. Not the Corvithi Empire. Not even the Syndicate at the height of their power." Kaela pulled up the trajectory data, her heart hammering in her chest. "They're on a direct approach vector to our position. Estimated time to contact. Range, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Origin point?" She highlighted the relevant data stream. "Sector 774, the dead zone." Drent's scales rippled, a Zephari expression of unease. "Nothing's out there except that primitive world, the one with the bipedal mammals. Earth," Kaela whispered. The word felt strange in her mouth. She'd read about them in Academy briefings. A single-planet species barely capable of interstellar travel, classified as negligible threat level. "Sir, nobody thinks you should panic the entire outpost over a sensor ghost." Drenth cut her off. "More likely it's a software corruption or stellar interference. Keep monitoring and let me know if anything changes." He walked away before she could protest. Kaela turned back to her screen, watching the contacts continue their steady approach. Something gnawed at the back of her mind, a half-remembered fragment from her xenohistory courses. She pulled up the archive interface and began searching. The old texts were dusty digital relics, translations of translations from species long extinct. Joes. She filtered by keywords: human, fleet, war, queen. The search results were sparse, mostly anthropological surveys and resource assessments. Then one entry caught her eye. Fragment from the Kellyan Exodus records, dated approximately 400 standard years ago. She opened it. The text was corrupted in places, but readable. Saw the burning Queen's ships fill the void like stars themselves. They came for the taken ones, the enslaved Our masters laughed until the sky turned to fire. "When the humans make war, they do not seek glory or territory. They seek only one thing: freedom for those who cannot fight. And woe to any who stand between." Kaela felt ice crystallize in her veins. The Kellians had been a slave-trading empire that vanished from history. No one knew why. The fragments suggested catastrophic military defeat, but the records were so damaged that most scholars dismissed them as mythology. She looked at her radar screen again. The fleet was still coming. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, pulling up classified intelligence files she technically didn't have clearance to access. The outpost's security was laughably lax for junior technicians who knew the right back doors. She found what she was looking for in a decades-old survey report. Earth System Assessment. Species demonstrates concerning capacity for organized violence and technological adaptation. Recommend continued observation but no direct contact. Current assessment. Contained to home system, minimal threat potential. Update. Latest surveillance indicates possible early-stage colonial expansion. Recommend reassessment in 50 standard years. The file was 43 years old. The recommended reassessment had never happened. Kaela pulled up current intelligence on human activity. There was almost nothing. A few scattered merchant reports of human trading vessels in neutral zones. Unconfirmed rumors of human settlements on frontier worlds. Nothing that would suggest military capacity on the scale her sensors were showing. Unless they'd been hiding it. Unless they'd been building in silence while the galaxy dismissed them as irrelevant. The communication panel chimed. Kaela's fingers froze over the controls. An incoming transmission on standard diplomatic frequencies. She routed it to her station and activated the translation matrix. The voice that emerged was female, speaking in clear galactic standard with an accent Kaela had never heard before. "Attention Zephari, Outpost Gamma 79. This is Admiral Devon Cole of the Terran Union Fleet. You are hereby ordered to power down all weapons systems and prepare to receive an official diplomatic communication. Any hostile action will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. You have 10 minutes to comply." Kaela's hand slammed down on the alert button. Klaxons wailed through the command center. Dranth came running back to her station, his scales flushed dark with alarm. "What in the void are hailing us?" Kaela said, her voice remarkably steady. "The human fleet. They're real and they're demanding compliance." Drench stared at the communication log, then at the radar display where the contact count had now exceeded 800 vessels. His jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. "Get me Commander Vectis, now!" The next 8 minutes were chaos. Commander Vectis arrived in the command center with half his uniform still unsealed, barking orders at his staff. The outpost's defensive grid powered up, point defense systems tracking the approaching fleet. Every scanner in the facility focused on the incoming armada, gathering data that made the situation worse with each passing second. The ships were massive, dreadnought-class vessels that dwarfed anything in the Zephari military. Carrier configurations that could deploy thousands of strike craft, vessels of designs the database couldn't even categorize, and at the center of the formation a flagship so large it registered as a minor moon. When the 10 minutes expired, the communication came again. This time, the main view screen activated automatically, overriding the outpost's controls. The image that appeared made Kaela's breath catch. The woman on the screen was tall by human standards, dark-skinned with close-cropped hair, and eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera into the soul of everyone watching. She wore a uniform of deep blue and silver, medals and insignia arranged with military precision across her chest. Behind her, Kaela could see the bridge of a warship, humans moving with practiced efficiency at their stations. But it was the crown that transfixed her, a simple circlet of what looked like platinum, set with a single blue stone that seemed to hold an inner light. Not ornate or gaudy, but unmistakably a symbol of authority. "I am Queen Sarah Mitchell of the Terran Union," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "And I bring a message to the Zephari Empire and all who profit from the slave trade." Commander Vectis found his voice. "This outpost is sovereign Zephari territory. Your fleet has no authority." Silence. The single word cut through his protest like a blade. The Queen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made even Vectis's scales pale. "You will listen. Within your territory you hold approximately 47,000 sentient beings in conditions of enslavement. Karvathi civilians captured in border raids, Drellin refugees sold by pirates, humans taken from frontier colonies." Kaela felt sick. She knew about the labor camps. Everyone did. But knowing and hearing it stated so bluntly were different things. "You have 6 hours, Queen Mitchell continued. "Release every enslaved individual in your territory. Provide them transport to neutral space where our vessels will collect them. Surrender all records of slave transactions for the past 20 years. Comply with these terms, and your outpost will not be harmed." Vectis's scales flushed with indignation. "You dare issue ultimatums to the Zephari Empire? We have crushed species with 10 times your numbers. You control one insignificant world and a handful of colonies. We will not be threatened by 6 hours, the Queen repeated. What you do with that time is your choice. But understand this, we know where every slave camp is. We know which of your officials profit from the trade. We have been watching you for 30 years, gathering evidence, building strength, and waiting for the right moment. That moment is now. The transmission ended. The view screen went dark. For several seconds, no one in the command center moved. Then Vectis laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. Madness. They're insane. Dispatch a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we have a situation requiring immediate military response. Sir, Kaela heard herself say. Perhaps we should consider... Consider what? Surrendering to a species we could crush in weeks? Humanity has what, 300 ships? Maybe 400? We're receiving reinforcements from the Second Fleet within 12 hours. This is a bluff, and a poor one. The sensors are reading over 800 vessels, Kaela insisted, and those are just the ones in scanning range. Sir, the historical records suggest what? That we should panic over ancient myths? Vectis turned to Drenth. Confine this technician to quarters for spreading defeatist propaganda. We have real work to do. 2 guards appeared at Kaela's side. She didn't resist as they led her away, but she couldn't stop looking back at the radar display. The human fleet had begun deploying into what looked like an encirclement formation. They were moving with a precision that suggested sophisticated tactical coordination. This wasn't a bluff. This was a military operation planned down to the smallest detail. In her quarters, Kaela paced like a caged animal. She had no access to the command systems, no way to monitor what was happening. The chronometer on her wall ticked away the minutes with agonizing slowness. 3 hours passed. Then 4. Then 5. She was lying on her bunk staring at the ceiling when the lights went red and the deck shuddered beneath her. The emergency klaxons were different this time, screaming with an urgency that spoke of actual combat. Kaela rushed to her small viewport. What she saw froze the blood in her veins. The human fleet had moved into attack range, and they were demonstrating exactly why the galaxy should have been paying attention. The defensive stations that ringed the outpost, mighty weapons platforms that had stood for a century, were dying. They didn't explode in dramatic fireballs. They simply came apart, shredded by weapons fire so precise and overwhelming that shields and armor might as well have been paper. A Zephari destroyer attempted to engage, its proud hull decorated with the honors of a dozen campaigns. Kaela watched human strike craft swarm it like insects, their weapons cutting through its defenses with surgical precision. The destroyer's reactor went critical. The explosion was a brief, brilliant star against the void. More Zephari ships were arriving, answering the distress call. They came in firing, their commanders confident in their superior numbers and battle experience. They died just as quickly. The human fleet didn't just outgun them. They outmaneuvered them, outcoordinated them, outthought them at every turn. It was like watching adults fight children. Kaela's door chimed. She spun, expecting guards, but instead found an older human male in combat armor standing in her doorway. He held a weapon, but it was pointed at the floor. "Kaela Thrin?" he asked in accented Zephari. She nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Webb, Terran Union Marines. We're evacuating non-combatants from this facility. You have 60 seconds to grab anything essential. Move." "I'm not a non-combatant. I'm military personnel. You're a radar technician who tried to warn your superiors and got confined for it." He tapped the side of his helmet. "We monitor everything. Now move, or I carry you. Your choice." Kaela grabbed her personal datapad and followed him into the corridor. What she saw there would stay with her for the rest of her life. Human Marines moved through the outpost like a tide. They weren't slaughtering everyone in sight. They were separating people. Zephari, military personnel who resisted, were put down with brutal efficiency. Those who surrendered were restrained and left for later collection. Civilian contractors and support staff were being herded toward evacuation points. And the slaves. Kaela saw them emerging from the lower levels. Korvathian, Drellin, and others. Some of them humans. They looked stunned, disbelieving. The Marines were gentle with them, guiding them toward transport shuttles with care that seemed at odds with the violence happening elsewhere in the station. Sergeant Webb led her to a staging area where other non-combatants were gathered. A human medic was treating a wounded Zephari female, working with the same focused professionalism she'd use on one of her own. The contrast was dizzying. "Why are you doing this?" Kaela asked Webb. "Why risk so much for slaves that aren't even your species?" The sergeant looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "'Cause somebody has to. Because we remember what it was like when we were divided and fighting each other. Because we decided that if we were going to reach for the stars, we were going to do it the right way." He paused. "And because the Queen lost her sister to slavers 20 years ago. Found her eventually, but not before they'd broken something inside her. Some of us fight for ideals. The Queen fights for every person who can't fight for themselves. Makes her dangerous. The outpost shuddered again. Through the viewport, Kaela saw the human flagship moving closer. It was magnificent and terrifying, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet. The crown emblem on its hull seemed to glow in the starlight. Commander Vectus's voice crackled over the emergency channel. Attention, human forces. We surrender. Ceasefire. We surrender. Sergeant Webb touched his helmet again, listening to something Kaela couldn't hear. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. What? Kaela asked. What is it? The Queen's response, he said quietly. Too late. What do you mean, too late? He surrendered. After the deadline. After firing on our ships. After 47,000 people spent another 6 hours in chains because he was too proud to do the right thing. Webb's jaw tightened. The Queen gave him a choice. He made it. Now he lives with the consequences. The assault continued. Kaela watched in numb horror as the last Zephari defensive positions were neutralized. The flag bridge where Vectus commanded was breached by Marines who moved with the unstoppable momentum of a force that had planned for every contingency. She heard later that Vectus had tried to trigger the outpost's self-destruct, willing to kill everyone aboard rather than face capture. The humans had disabled it before he could complete the sequence. When the fighting finally stopped, the outpost was in human hands. Every slave had been evacuated. Every Zephari military officer was in custody. And Kaela found herself on a shuttle heading toward the flagship that had once been just a massive blip on her radar screen. The interior of the vessel was nothing like a Zephari warship. Everything was clean, efficient, marked with clear signage in multiple languages. The crew moved with purpose, humans of every shade and size working together with the kind of unity that came from shared purpose. They passed sections where freed slaves were receiving medical care, where children were being fed and clothed and comforted. Sergeant Webb delivered her to a conference room near the ship's command center. The Queen wants to speak with you, he said, directly. Kaela's protest died in her throat when the door opened and Queen Sarah Mitchell entered the room. In person, she was even more imposing, tall, powerful, radiating authority that had nothing to do with the crown she wore. But her eyes, when they settled on Kaela, weren't cruel. They were tired. Sit, the Queen said, gesturing to a chair. She took the seat across from Kaela, no desk between them. You tried to warn them. Yes, Your Majesty. Did you believe the warnings would work? Kaela hesitated. No. I knew Commander Vectus. Proud. He would never back down from a perceived inferior species, no matter what the evidence showed. And yet you tried anyway. The Queen leaned forward. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Because unnecessary death serves no purpose. Because, Kaela's voice dropped to a whisper, because I read the old texts, I knew what was coming. Queen Mitchell nodded slowly. The Kellyan records, the Burning Queen, my ancestors were theatrical people. She touched the crown on her head. This isn't ceremonial, you know. It's a reminder of responsibility, of what we're fighting for. Every human child learns about the slave ships that used to cross our oceans centuries ago. We learned what happens when you treat people as property. We swore never again, not to us, not to anyone. You'll start a war, Kaela said. The Zephari Empire will retaliate. The other slave-trading powers will unite against you. Let them. The Queen's voice was hard as steel. We've been preparing for this for 30 years. While the galaxy dismissed us as primitives, we built ships. While they squabbled over territory, we trained soldiers in refined tactics. While they grew complacent in their cruelty, we sharpened ourselves into a weapon designed for one purpose, ending slavery wherever we find it. You can't fight the entire galaxy. We don't need to fight the entire galaxy. Just the parts that profit from misery. Queen Mitchell stood, walking to the viewport where the wreckage of the Zephari defense fleet drifted. Most species just want to live their lives in peace. It's the empires, the cartels, the ones who build their wealth on the backs of the helpless that need to fall, and they will fall. She turned back to Kaela. I'm sending you home. Back to Zephari Prime. You're going to deliver a message to your government. What message? That this outpost was just the beginning. We're hitting 17 other slave facilities simultaneously. Within a week, we'll have liberated 200,000 individuals. Within a month, 500,000. We're not stopping. We're not negotiating. Every chain will be broken, every slaver brought to justice, every empire that profits from suffering brought low. The Queen's expression softened slightly, but we're not monsters. Species that abandon the practice, that cooperate in dismantling the infrastructure, that make genuine amends to those they've wronged. They'll find us reasonable, generous even. We want partners in building a better galaxy, not enemies. And if they refuse, then they'll learn why humanity's first instinct when we reached the stars was to build warships instead of trade vessels. Queen Mitchell walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. Tell them the legends were right. Tell them the Burning Queen is real, and tell them she's not alone anymore. There's a whole species behind her, and we've decided that freedom is non-negotiable. The door closed behind her, leaving Kaela alone with her thoughts. Through the viewport, she could see human ships spreading out across the sector, their engines blazing like stars. In the distance, more fleets were arriving. Not Zephari reinforcements, more human vessels, answering their queen's call. 3 days later, Kaela stood in the Grand Assembly Hall on Zephari Prime, facing the Council of Elders who ruled the Empire. She delivered the Queen's message word for word, her voice never wavering even as the council members' scales flushed with rage and fear. When she finished, the eldest council member leaned forward. "What is your assessment, Technician Threen? Can we defeat them?" Kaela thought about the precision of the human fleet, the care they took with the freed slaves, the cold efficiency with which they dismantled military opposition, the sheer scale of the armada she'd seen on her radar that first day. "No," she said simply. "We can't, and we shouldn't try." The council erupted in angry hisses and protests, but Kaela stood her ground, thinking of the crown the Queen wore, not a symbol of conquest or domination. A reminder of responsibility, of purpose, of a species that had looked at the darkness in their own history and decided to become something better. The legends hadn't been warnings to fear the humans. They'd been warnings to become worthy of standing beside them. Within 6 months, the Zephari Empire signed the Terran Accords, abolishing slavery throughout their territory and establishing reparations programs for former slaves. 12 other species followed. The slave trade didn't end overnight, but it began to die, strangled by human fleets and the growing coalition of species who decided the old ways were no longer acceptable. Kaela eventually joined that coalition, working as a liaison between the Terran Union and former slave trading powers. She never forgot that day she saw the fleet on her radar. Never forgot the moment she realized the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had come to the stars, and they brought their ideals with them, enforced by weapons and will and the unshakable conviction that every sentient being deserved freedom. The age of chains was ending, and Kaela had been there to watch it die.